Good morning. My clock says it's straight up 12 noon. I've got the recording going. I believe everything's set. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Beef on Dairy Dialogue webinar series, an extension of the annual Dairy Beef Short Course held in conjunction with the Central Plains Dairy Expo each March. The short course is the longest running program focusing on steers with dairy genetics in the U.S., with 15 years of continuous programming. The short course is sponsored by the I-29 Moo University, a consortium of extension specialists from Iowa State University, University of Minnesota, University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and South Dakota State University. The I-29 University Beef on Dairy Dialogue series continues today with Ingrid Fernandes discussing how her study followed beef on dairy cattle from weaning through slaughter to understand how early life respiratory disease influences performance and carcass value. Ingrid is a graduate research assistant in the Department of Animal Science at Pennsylvania State University and is co-advised by Dr. Tara Felix and Dr. Melissa Cantor. Her study shows that bovine respiratory disease can leave lasting effects beyond the initial illness, underscoring its importance for both animal health and industry profitability. She is originally from Brazil and has a background in ruminant nutrition and management, calf health, and livestock production systems. Her academic and professional experiences across Brazil and the United States have given her a comprehensive understanding of animal science with a special emphasis on calf development, traceability, and feedlot management. She is passionate about integrating research with the industry practices to support sustainable and profitable animal agriculture. As I always say, Ingrid, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Fred, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today and share a little bit of what I have been done here at Penn State. And as Fred mentioned, this was my thesis, and I'm going to show you some of the results and how BRD identified very early in beef and dairy calves' lives can have a long-term impact in their lives. Um, you are let me just minimize this so I can see everything. You're probably tired of seeing this graphic, but I think it's very important to start a presentation showing this graphic so we know why we're studying those animals, right? This is the US domestic semen sales graphic since 2009. And we can see that starting in 2017, there was a drastic increase in the sales of beef semen and a decrease on the sales of dairy semen, as you can see in the red line. That difference was approximately 7 million units of increase in beef and decrease in dairy semen sales. And that's due to the matings from the dairy and the beef that the dairy producers have been working on. And because our beef females here in the US, 90% of our beef females here are mated by natural service, and that would not change overnight, right? So this semen, it's being used by the dairy producers. And because of that, there was a drastic increase in the beef and dairy animals entering the industry. And in 2024, it was estimated that those animals were 20% of the fed cattle here in the US. And that's very important because of the scenario that we are facing right now with the low beef cow inventory in the US, these beef and dairy animals, they're having a drastic increase in the market value. Um, this this increase in the market value just highlight the importance of understanding better their growth performance, understanding better what are the challenges that they face throughout their life, especially because they change operations throughout their life, and that can have lasting impacts. Those animals averaged last year, at least here in our region, Pennsylvania, they average $1,000. We could find animals being sold in auctions for $1,500. And it's funny because a couple weeks ago I was checking the some auction reports, and I observed some beef and dairy heifers being sold for $1,600. So that it's pretty high. And as I mentioned, because they are born in a dairy, not every dairy take those animals to feed those animals for beef. They can go through multiple ownership changes throughout their life. They can be sold at birth. They can be sold at birth, at weaning. As a grower, around 250 kilograms, that would be around 550 pounds. And at feedlot entry, that could be around 700 pounds approximately. But most of those calves, they are sold at birth. And that period, the pre-weaning period and the calfhood period, it's very important because, as we know, calves are born with a naive immune system, meaning that they have an immune system that is still not fully capable of fighting diseases. That's why they rely heavily on the antibodies that is supplied through colostrum. Those antibodies that those animals are going to acquire at birth, it's going to protect them against diseases until around 2 weeks of age, when they start capacitating their own immune system to fight disease. And that immune system, it's going to be fully capacitated around 8 months of age. So everything that happened before that period has the potential to increase the risk of diseases in those animals that come from the dairy, right? And we know that they undergo a lot of stresses throughout that period that can put them at a greater risk of developing any diseases. And in that period, the bovine respiratory disease is one of the most important diseases, and that has it's a big concern for the industry because it is a complex disease, and many environmental factors and many pathogens can be involved in the development of that disease. The major BRD pathogens, they're considered commensal, meaning that they can be found in animals that are sick and animals that are healthy. They are already present in the upper respiratory tract, and in a healthy animal, that microbiota is balanced, so those pathogens doesn't cause any clinical signs and diseases. When those animals undergo stressors, and they already have an immune system that is not fully capacitated, and then they go undergo stressors, that immune system can be compromised. And when that happens, it creates an imbalance in the microbiota of the upper respiratory tract of those animals. And those pathogens are allowed to multiply and to be transported to the lower respiratory tract. So when that pathogen is there, those animals already have a compromised immune system, that it's going to create an inflammation. Once they get in contact with the lung tissue, it's going to create an immune system response, and all of that, it's going to fill those alveolus with liquid and cause some tissue damage. And that's what we call lung consolidation. So lung consolidation can be a result of BRD. And I mentioned that some stressors can contribute to BRD, but what are those stressors? Here I listed some of those. I hope I was able to put the majority here. But the weaning is a very important stressor period for those animals. commingling, vaccination, and beef and dairy calves, and even the dairy calves, they undergo all these can undergo all these stressors before even weaning or a couple weeks post weaning. And sometimes those stressors, they happen all together. For example, some operations are going to wean the calves, and right after they're going to commingle, or they since they are already handling those animals, they're going to vaccinate too. So stacking those stressors one on top of the other make it much harder for the calf to fight that period and to overcome that period without getting sick. As I mentioned, there are many pathogens that can be involved in BRD, and they're commensal. They can be isolated and identified in animals that are healthy and animals that are sick. Here I listed a few of the most common reported pathogens, and some of these pathogens can cause more severe clinical signs than others. For example, Mycoplasmopsis bovis was reported to be associated with lung consolidation and with a reduction in average daily gain. While we still don't have studies that had observed studies with the other pathogens that had observed the same association. And with the improvement of the technologies to identify microorganisms, now with the 16S, we are able to identify what is in there in the complete microbiota. And we can find viruses, many other bacterias, and we can find even bacteria that it's already associated with liver abscesses or food rot and gut infections. So all those bacteria were already isolated from, identified from the respiratory tract of cattle. I'm just showing this to explain that the disease is very complex because all these microorganisms, they interact with each other, and some can have a protective effect against the diseases. BRD can cause some clinical signs in cattle, and these are the most common clinical signs that are ear tilt, as you can see in the image. I have an older cattle here, older calf. Ear tilt, it's going to be when the calf had a ear that it's lower than the other one. This one, for example, he had BRD. You can observe cough, you can observe heavy breathing, ocular or nasal discharge, and those are pretty similar symptoms that we have when we have a flu. Some animals are going to show one symptom of these ones or two, or some animals are not even going to show any symptoms because they can just sometimes just have an upper respiratory tract. They're gonna show one symptom, but they don't have lung consolidation. So it's a little bit complex. But using those clinical signs, some universities created scoring systems that would help producers to identify those animals and treat them. For example, the US Davis created this score system that you can see here, that we can score eye discharge and nasal discharge and all the other symptoms, clinical signs that I mentioned. And it's just a yes or no if the animal have or not that clinical sign. And you're going to diagnose an animal with BRD when you have a score equal or greater than 5. For example, if you have an eye discharge, you're gonna have 2 points. And if you have on top of that nasal discharge, you're gonna have an extra 4 points. So in total, you have 6 points. So that animal is considered a BRD animal. Another scoring that was developed was from Wisconsin, and this is a little bit different because they're going to score the severity of the symptom too. If an animal have a nasal discharge, a little bit of nasal discharge or a lot of nasal discharge, that you're going to score 1 or 3, for example. And for this system, you have to have a score of 2 or greater in at least 2 categories to diagnose an animal with BRD. But this is pretty helpful in farms, and you can start using this tomorrow if you need it. However, scoring using those clinical signs sometimes can have a lower sensitivity. In the thoracic ultrasonography, it's already a gold standard diagnostics in research settings because because of its high sensitivity, as you can see here. That means that it is more likely to diagnose BRD when you use thoracic lung ultrasonography to identify the lung consolidation than when you use only clinical signs. And when you can use both together, that is much better. Here I just have an image if you're interested to see what we see when we do a ultrasonography. This is an image of the lung, and this is the pleura. And when the pleura is clear and throughout the whole image, it's a healthy lung tissue. And when it's disrupted like that, that means that it's a consolidation. And BRD can cause high mortality rates too. The USDA in 2017 reported that from 1995 to 2015, 23% of the mortalities in beef calves were caused by BRD, and almost 33% of the mortalities in dairy calves were caused by BRD. So that can cause huge economic losses for the producer. They also estimated in 2017 that considering $1,000 per head per calf, they estimated economic losses of $213 million per year, just considering the death of that animal. If we think that we're going to medicate, we're going to invest some labor in that animal, and if that animal doesn't die, there is also losses in average daily gain. We can add a $42 per head to treat those animals that had BRD. But these values was from 2017. Now we know that the calf it's worth much more, and medication is more expensive, and all of that. So probably those values are a little bit higher now. Yeah, I mentioned that BRD can cause a reduction in average daily gain, and that was reported by Cuevas Gomez and colleagues in 2021, and also from Rods and colleagues in 2021. They reported a reduction in 120 grams of average daily gain per day on those animals that had at least 3 centimeters of lung consolidation. That represents nearly a quarter of a pound in reduction of average daily gain. So that's a big deal. That's big losses for those animals. Those studies were done in pre-weaning dairy calves, so we don't have information. We didn't have information on beef and dairy animals. We also didn't know if those losses, those insults happening so early would have a lasting impact, would affect the long-term growth performance of those animals. And that's why we came with this first study to investigate the association of lung consolidation, which we would determine as BRD, and the respiratory pathogens identified weaning on the growth performance of beef and dairy calves. For this first study, we collected data until 238 days of age, which we can consider that the growing phase of the animal. And the objectives were to investigate the association of the lung consolidation and weaning on the growth performance of the beef and dairy calves, and see if the different severities of lung consolidation would also how that would affect the average daily gain on those animals, and if would affect differently. We also wanted to investigate the odds of pathogen shedding at weaning on lung consolidation and average daily gain. To do that, we sourced 143 calves from 2 different dairies here from the region. We sourced males and females. They had a 53-day window between birthdays. At birth, they were transported to a calf ranch where they stay until weaning, and they were raised in 3 different cohorts that had 21-day window. At weaning, they were transported again to a grower ranch where they stay until 238 days of age. I just wanted to highlight here that we decided to do this strategy because that would represent the reality of the industry right now. So in the calf ranch, we step downwind those calves at 57 days of age. And 4 days post-weaned, we perform health exams, we weigh those animals. We also perform a thoracic lung ultrasonography to identify those animals that had lung consolidation and the ones that did not have lung consolidation. We decided to do that 4 days post-weaning because if those animals were to get sick, they would have time to develop the clinical signs and develop the lung consolidation, and we would be able to catch those animals that got sick. And we defined those animals that had at least 1 centimeter of lung consolidation as positive for BRD. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to call them BRD. And the ones that did not have lung consolidation or had lung consolidation less than 1 centimeter, we call them control, and they were negative for BRD for this study. I also recorded the lung consolidation severity. So animals that did not have lung consolidation was one group. And then I grouped the other animals that had lung consolidation from 1 to less than 3 centimeters in a different group, and animals with lung consolidation equal 3 centimeters in a third group. I calculated average daily gain in 3 different periods. Period 1 was from birth to weaning. Period 2 was from weaning to 3 weeks post-weaning. And period 3 was from 83 days, which is 3 weeks post-weaning, to 238 days of age, which is around 8 months of age. We selected those 3 different periods because they represent the major points of sale for beef and dairy calves. To do the pathogen analysis, we had to pair match the sick calves with health calves, so we would avoid confounding for this part of the study. So we selected the animals that had BRD with lung consolidation of at least 1 centimeter. And to be part of this study, they should not have diarrhea during the pre-weaning period, no antimicrobial use, and a serum total protein of at least 5.1 grams per deciliter. And the healthy calves should be pair-matched to the BRD calves for this part of the study should not have lung consolidation, no diarrhea, the same criteria for the BRD, no diarrhea in the pre-weaning period, no antimicrobial use, and a serum total protein of at least 5.1 grams per deciliter. And then when we identify those 2 groups of animals, we pair match them by sex, cohort, and birth weight. The serum total protein threshold 5.1 was selected by our team because Lombard and colleagues in 2020 reported that that threshold would represent a success passive transfer of immunity through colostrum on those animals. After we pair matched them, we collected a nasopharyngeal swab from both the animals with BRD and the control animals, the healthy animals, and we sent to culture for the major BRD pathogens and to perform a PCR for Mycoplasmopsis bovis. You're going to see that in bold Pasteurella multicida and Babestoria trehalose because they were the only ones that were found among all the other ones. So when we went to pair match those animals, we observed 35 that was a BRD case, and we pair matched other 35 healthy controls for the pathogen study. We observed that 20 cases, BRD cases, had Pasteurella multisida, and 99 healthy control had Pasteurella multisida. We also saw 2 cases of trihalose. One was isolated from a BRD case, and the second one was isolated from a healthy control. In total, 57% of the BRD cases and 26% of the healthy control animals had a pathogen isolated. And as I mentioned, those pathogens, they're commensal, so we already expected to observe them in both BRD cases and healthy controls. The control calves, they had lower odds of shedding Pasteurella multisida. To be more specific, they were 79% less likely to shed multisida when we compare them with animals that had lung consolidation of 1 and 2 centimeters. And they were 90% less likely to shed multisida when we compare to animals that had lung consolidation equal to 3 centimeters. We also did not observe any association with average daily gain. As you can see, animals with pathogen isolated and animals with no pathogen, they perform the same. The control calves, the healthy calves at weaning, they gain better when we compare to animals that were diagnosed with BRD during period 2. The period 2 was the period, those 3 weeks post-weaning. And the health animals, they gain 140 grams more per day compared to those animals that had lung consolidation during that period. That it's probably a third of a pound in reduction in average daily gain for those animals that were sick during those the 3 weeks post-weaning. But what is interesting here is that during period 3, that is after those first 3 weeks post-weaning up to 8 months of age, we see that those animals that had lung consolidation at weaning, they compensate those losses that they have early on, and they even numerically perform a little bit better than health animals, but it was not statistically different. I would like to highlight that these animals, they were not treated for BRD, and so that showed that they have innate capacity to overcome that disease and even perform very well after that. But then that raised that question, when should we be treating those animals then? Should we be treating them with 1, 2, or 3 centimeters of lung consolidation? Does the severity matter in that case? So then we group them in depending on their lung consolidation severity. Since we saw that difference during the period 3, which is the 3 weeks post-weaning, we analyzed that period and we saw something very interesting. Those animals that had lung consolidation of 1 to less than 3 centimeters, they performed the same as healthy animals during that period. And we saw that once they were pulling down, the average daily gain for that group was the animals that had lung consolidation equal 3 centimeters. So for this first part of the study, we observed that the results corroborates with previous study that were done in hostings during pre-weaning. And we saw a reduction of 140 grams in average daily gain up to 3 weeks post-weaning for beef and dairy calves, that it's a third of a pound almost. But they overcome those insults that happen early on by 8 months of age. And the Pasteurella multisida, which was the pathogen, the major pathogen observed in this study, was associated with lung consolidation, meaning that the probability of that animal have the Pasteurella multisida isolated and lung consolidation at the same time was high. But that was not associated with average daily gain. So, but why that's important? Why those insults early on is important? Because you might ask yourself, okay, they have a reduction in average daily gain, but they compensate that later and they recover, so that's fine. That's also going to depend on when you sell that animal, what stage you're selling that animal. But the most important here is the process of intramuscular adipogenesis. It's going to be happening during that period. This process, they start on the late fetal stages and go up to 8 months of age. But what is that? The intramuscular adipogenesis, it's when the calves are putting new fat cells inside of the muscle. So they're multiplying those cells inside of the muscle. And the density of the multipotent cells and the intensity of that process is going to gradually decrease over time. So closer to the end of that marbly window, those animals are going to be putting less and less and less fat cells inside of that muscle. So everything that happened before that has the potential to impact that marbling window and impact the marbling of those animals later on. And so with that, I'm going to transition to the second part of the study that we investigated the association of the lung consolidation dose beef from dairy during the feedlot. So we want to see growth performance, carcass characteristics, and so on. The period of that study was from around 12 months of age until 15, 16 months of age, depending on the age of the animal. But a quick background here on how BRD can impact cattle. There are some studies showing that carcass traits were impacted in cattle that was treated for BRD during the feedlot. They showed that hot carcass weight was reduced with the increase on the number of treatments during the feedlot. Marbling was also reduced with the increase in the number of treatments for BRD during the feedlot period. But the limitations of those studies that they use treatment records that they didn't have they could not go to the feedlot and score those animals themselves and identify those animals themselves. So they had to trust on the records that they had for the farm. The second limitation is they also use lung lesions at slaughter. So with those two limitations, they cannot say when that animal got sick, for how long that animal got sick. So there was no studies out there showing us what were the last impacts. This was the only studies that we would be able to see that. So studies during the feedlot or during the reception period. And with that, we focus on our second part of the study that we want to investigate the association of BRD that was diagnosed very early in life at weaning with feedlot growth performance and carcass trace in beef and dairy cattle. The animals that we used for the second part of the study was the same. So the management pre-weaning and for the growing period was the same. And after the from the grower, they were transported to the feedlot around 12 months of age. And in the feedlot, they had a 12 days of adaptation for the diet and the environment. And we started collecting data after that. After those 12 days, we collected body weight in 2 consecutive days, and we averaged those 2 days and considered that as initial weight. The cattle was sent to slaughter to a certain target weight. The steers were sent as 680 kilograms, which is 1,500 pounds, and the heifers were sent in when they had 635 kilograms, which is 1,400 pounds. We sent them in 5 different slaughter days that had a window of 41 days from the first load to the last load. We also recorded dry matter intake during the feedlot. We used the Grow Safe from Vital to do that. So 48 hours after sending the animals, after the animals being slaughtered, We drove down to JBS to collect information on hot carcass weight, back fat, marbling score, and ribeye area. With all this data, we are able to calculate yield grade. And so BRD at weaning for this part of this study did not affect growth performance in those beef and dairy cattle in the feedlot. As you can see, the average daily gain for the growing phase was 1.10 kilograms per day. That it's going to be 2.4, 2.5 pounds per day during the whole growing period. Initial body weight didn't differ. Final body weight didn't differ. Average daily gain, dry matter intake, or feed efficiency didn't differ. But remember that I mentioned that we send the animals to a certain target weight. So the final body weight should actually not be different. BRD also did not impact most of the carcass traits at slaughter. Hot carcass weight was similar. Actually, in this case, was exactly the same for both groups, for animals that were healthy and animals that had BRD at weaning. This is probably around 850, 900 pounds of hot carcass weight. Dressing percentage also didn't differ. And dressing percentage in those in beef and dairy animal, it's a little bit less than what we expect for beef native animals, that it is normally around 63, 64 percent, 64% of dressing percentage. Ribeye area, these 9.796 centimeters square would represent around 15 inches square of ribeye area. And this is more in line with the beef native cattle compared to the Holstein that would be around 13, 14 inches. The rib fat thickness also did not differ. This would represent nearly half of an inch of rib fat, which is also more in line with beef native. Yield grade also did not differ from cattle that did not have BRD and cattle that had BRD at weaning. However, the interesting part here is that marbling score was reduced in those animals that had BRD at weaning compared to those that were healthy at weaning. It was reduced by 7%, around 7%. And just going back on why that possibly, what would be our hypothesis that would be happening with those animals? Remember I mentioned that intramuscular adipogenesis happen from the late fetal stages and can go up to 8 months of age. And those animals, they were diagnosed with BRD at 2 months of age. So the marbling window was still open, and those calves were still putting some fat cells inside of the muscle. So our hypothesis is that the BRD solds, remember, they had a reduction in average daily gain during that period too. So probably the beer in the solds compromised that process, which probably potentially had was what reduced the marbling at slaughter. Remember that when that marbling window is closed, the only thing we can do to manipulate that marbling is through hypertrophy, which is what we can do during the feedlot. And it's important to highlight here that marbling, it's a metric for quality, carcass quality. And over 70% of the producers in the US, they sell their animals on a carcass quality grade. And here I want to just to show you how those animals marble, how we score those the marbling in cattle. You can see that this light, as the last on the right image, the bottom, a carcass that has slight marbling would be graded select, and as an example. And a carcass with moderated abundant marbling would be scored as a prime carcass. And for the sake of this study, we grouped those animals in three different groups because we select the upper two-thirds choice and above. We group those three categories as one because it would represent a better profit for the producers, the animals that fall into those categories. So we use the upper two-thirds choice and above as one group, low choice and as another group, and select as another one. And because we had that reduction in marbling score, we also observed different in those carcass quality groups. We saw a numeric less carcass graded select for animals that were healthy and more carcass graded select for animals that had beard at weaning. And select is the bottom of the quality scoring system. So we also saw an increase on the upper two-thirds choice and above for those animals that were healthy, and less animals that were graded on the upper two-thirds choice and above for the animals that had beard at weaning. An important fact here is that animals that were healthy at weaning had 7 carcasses graded prime. The animals that were sick at weaning had none carcass graded prime. And so one of the major conclusions is that the reduction in average daily gain that we observed for the beef and dairy calves in the first study agree with the other studies that were done in Holstein calves during the pre-weaning period. And these early life bearding salts that happen, like the reduction in average daily gain that we observed, they had lasting impacts beyond just growth during that period. They also affect the meat quality at slaughter. And with the high market value of these animals, and now we know with the risk, that beardy risk the quality and productivity of these animals, it is very important to understand better how those challenges can affect the rest of the chain, especially because those animals, they are going to change ownerships, and some operations can have more losses because of that than others, right? We know that the industry is extremely segmented now. Those calves gonna jump from operation to operation. So it's important for future studies to highlight more, to track better the life of those animals so that can create a better connection between the industries so we can optimize the growth performance and the production of these animals for a better sustainability, especially on the scenario that we're facing right now for the beef industry. This study took 2 years, so we needed a lot of help. And I'd like to thank everybody that was involved here on this slide. And that's it. That's what I have for today. Thank you very much. I would like to take any questions and we can discuss a little bit about it.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. We're still have quite a few people on. If you'd like to type your question into the chat box, that'd probably ensure that it gets answered. We can try unmuting. We want to be respectful and not walk on other folks who are trying to get questions answered. While we're doing that, one of the questions that had come in early, would postponing weeding or giving a bigger transition period help mitigate the issues you saw?
Well, we didn't study that specifically, but some studies reported that the transition period, it's very important to mitigate the stress of that period for the animal. So a long transition period, depending on the amount of feed depending on the amount of milk replacer you're feeding, it's important to mitigate that. Yes, that would help. Um, about longer periods, you said longer feeding for milk replacer for longer. Is that what you ask?
Yes, correct.
Um, we I cannot remember from the top of my head of any studies that had done that and investigated like the effects on BRD. So I cannot say that based on studies. I can say that based on what we have seen in some farms that we visit. And we see that the shorter the period that you feed milk, you're gonna see more BRD cases later on too in those animals, yes.
Thank you. Neville asked, if we're going to change the incidence of BRD, we need to do it in the first 60 days? And that's a question.
If you wanna like reduce the incidence of BRD, you would do it during the first 60 days.
Correct.
Um, yeah, that that would help. Like what it's the most important for health events to reduce health events like disease events in beef and dairy calves is colostrum, first of all, because as I mentioned, we know that those animals they are born with immune system, naive immune system, right? They cannot fight diseases. So if you give them good quality colostrum, enough antibodies for them to go through that period and protected against diseases, that would be very important. And as I mentioned, all those stressors, try to avoid stressors altogether, stacking stressors one off the top of the other, because that makes harder for the calves to overcome that period. So if you give a time between the handling, the managements that you have to do, it's better. Um, so that would help the post-weaning period that for that calf, so that the animal would handle that better for sure.
Thank you. When we saw the slide deck there, were there any breed difference? It looked like you had a couple different crossbred animals. Uh, were there any difference in the program?
Yes, we included that in our models to avoid for any confounding, of course. But we had a little bit of different in hot carcass weight for a couple animals. Simmental head were heavier. We had a couple of differences in marbling, but for our analysis, that was not impacted at all because that was considered in our model too.
Very good. Very good. You'd mentioned a scoring card to evaluate, you had the picture with the nasal issues. Where is that scoring card available from?
Oh, you can find that online. If you just Google US Davis respiratory scoring system, you're gonna find that online. Yeah. Do you want me to go back there?
Well, I gave you a perfect shot. I was assuming that was a Penn State product.
No, that is not. One is from UC Davis, and the other one is from Wisconsin. And then that's going to depend what you prefer, because one system is a yes or no system, and the other system it's more like a level of severity system. So you're gonna score 0, 1, 2, 3, depending on the severity of the symptom. So you can pick or choose whatever is better for your farm.
Is it a threshold thing that if you see an animal with a nasal discharge, that trips the the idea that we will see BRD, or is it a severity? They've got to get to a 3 or 4 before we actually have a relationship.
So for the scoring system from Wisconsin, you have to have a score of at least 2, so or 2 or greater for at least 2 categories or more. So you can say that that animal has a BRD and you can possibly treat that animal. So there is a threshold there for the Wisconsin system is that at least two categories with a score of at least two. And for the UC Davis system, it's a score of five or greater on every, like, would be summing every category that would, like, you would define BRD like that.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat box, but I encourage people to. We did have, or as I watched the slide deck, how often are producers using the ultrasonography to
Mhm.
identify? Is that fairly common that you're seeing, or not so much?
No, it's we use a lot in research settings because we want to make sure that that animal has a BRD. I I think I probably I don't hear much. If your farm has a vet that has an ultrasound, that's also it's going to depend on the price and how that's gonna bring the profit and how that's gonna benefit your farm. Then you can have, I think I saw one person saying that they use ultrasound, which would be great because you can more accurately find those animals that had BRD. Because as I mentioned, the clinical signs sometimes they don't represent BRD. So, sometimes you might be treating animals that actually doesn't have BRD, or sometimes you're going to be treating animals that would just overcome that disease easily because it doesn't have a lung consolidation or anything. So yeah, we don't see that very much. Would be very nice if everybody could use it, but that's not the reality, right?
Yep. For those of us in the Midwest, if they're interested, the dairy team here in Iowa is having a program on the 21st of July where we actually will use that machinery and try to give some interpretations so veterinarians will have maybe a little bit more experience on that.
That's great.
While we're waiting for another question, or if somebody wants to unmute, go ahead. I'll give a few seconds. Okay, my final question here.
Mhm.
We haven't used the L word. So any indication of carcass trim with animals with BRD and especially with liver abscesses?
So, um, in our study, we didn't have that kind of problem. We didn't have very severe abscesses that would have to trim all that part of the animal. But we see that the more severe the liver abscess, that trim it's gonna happen and a percentage of your hot carcass weight gonna drop and you're gonna be paid a little bit less because of that. But in our study, we had only one severe liver abscess and was not that severe. It was not as there to the cavity, to the diaphragm. And we had 12 livers that were condemned, and only one that was a severe liver abscess. So we know that liver abscess can be regional too, right? And we don't see a large number, a large percentage of animals here in the East Coast, in the east side of US, sorry, um, in cattle. So maybe that's why, because it's going to depend a lot on the diet of that animal. And our diet's a little bit different from the Midwest and the South.
Very good. Ingrid, thank you for the information you shared today and the
Thank you.
discussion
My
with
pleasure.
the audience. I remind everybody that this webinar has been recorded and will be archived on the I-29 Moo University webpage by the end of the week. I say that as I knock on the wood. I will send out an email to everyone who's registered when it is in fact up. I also ask you to complete the evaluation for the program. That's how we improve each program. I invite you to next month's Beef on Dairy Dialogue with Dr. Katie Kramer, who'll be discussing calf transportation issues on November 13th. You will be receiving an invitation to that early next week. Ingrid, any parting words you want to share?
No, I said everything. If someone have has any other questions that pops up later, here's my email. Just text me and I can try to answer that and help you.
Very good. Thank you again. Thank the
Thank you.
audience for attending, and I will sign off at this point.
Thank you very much. Bye.